Hi, this is Bob Grant from Relationship Headquarters, and today I have the privilege of having Sandy Werner for a last first date. So, Sandy, nice to have you first off.
Good to be here, Bob. Thank you for having me.
One of the things I noticed just with your title, I found that really interesting as I was kind of searching around looking for people to interview, and then I started watching some of your content, and I got more interested. If you'll tell us, how did you come up with that name? And I'm sure there's a lot that went into that, and as far as a lot of thought on your part.
Yeah, so when I started coaching, I was not even a dating coach. I was a life coach helping people with
Hmm.
life transitions. And I started helping friends with their dating life before I was dating. After my divorce, I spent about 2 years taking some time off to just get my life together and be a good mom for my kids and start a new business in life coaching. And I realized how little my friend knew about dating. Like intuitively, she was dating all the wrong people. She had a horrible profile. I knew nothing about online dating, but her profile was just
Mhm.
so vague. And she was attracting people who fell into her net because she wasn't reaching out to people. She had terrible pictures. And so, it's just kind of common sense. But I was helping her. She was getting good results. Then I started helping other people and I was like, oh, and then this is kind of fun and I enjoy this and I'm actually
Mhm.
good at it because my life coaching background and my whole relationship history helped me to be a better dater, better person in relationships. And as I got onto online dating, I realized that everybody's profile said, I want to go on my last first date. And I
Mhm.
was like, oh, that's what we all want, right? We just
Mhm.
want to stop dating and go on our last first date and just get into a relationship. And some miracle, it was available as a
Mhm.
.com and that became my business.
Mhm. Actually, that is funny. I didn't think about that. The fact that it would be available as far as your domain goes, and I love the idea of how practical and specific is when you're describing this about how a profile looks and how a profile is written. Hearing it, that sounds so obvious, but I guess if I'm filling it out, that may be something that I or someone might overlook or not pay attention to.
Yeah, most people don't have any clue as to what they're doing wrong. I had a friend reach out to me once and she said, can you take a look at my profile and let me know what you think? And I gave her honest feedback and she didn't take in any of it. But the first thing she did that was wrong was she described how she looked in her profile. I am
Uh,
petite. I am pretty. I have blue eyes. Let somebody else look at your pictures
mhm.
and not tell people what they are seeing. It's really off-putting actually to have somebody describe themselves as handsome or beautiful and hysterically funny and I'm going to make you laugh. I mean, I think people think they're doing the right thing
Mhm.
and we can't see ourselves. I've had so many first conversations with people men who are trying to impress me and they're telling me their entire life story before I've ever even seen them. And I had a guy recently who, within 5 minutes, he had to get off the phone and he started sending me pictures of his daughters and their wedding and what a mess he was during the wedding
Mhm.
ceremony. I'm like, I don't know you.
Mhm.
And he's like, let's get the conversation started. I'm like, no, you skipped about 20 steps. So then people wonder, why am I single? And those are some of the reasons.
When you're just describing that, and I've heard horror stories from people, at least it felt that way. But I'm taken by the idea of people don't necessarily see something or they have good intentions. And I know this is beyond just dating profiles because you do a lot more than that. How do you find that blind spot or that area that I think all of us have that we don't see really affects people when it comes to dating and really looking for their last first date?
Well, it's everything. I mean, I think even in our regular conversations, I was just listening to the Hidden Brain podcast, and it was all about the kinds of conversations we have. We don't know how to have deeper conversations. We don't ask open-ended questions. We ask yes or no questions. And we wonder why nothing's happening, why we're not really getting into that deeper level that we're looking for. Little things that people don't realize, even how we share about our lives and our history, especially when you're dating later in life, as my clients are. We have a history. It's how you present it. So instead of saying, I've never been married, I'm a loser, I mean, it might be how somebody might see themselves. Obviously, they wouldn't say those words, but painting yourself in the light that like a PR person would paint you, because that's what we're doing. We're trying to sell who we are at our best, not our worst. And so I help people to layer their stories. And so taking level one would be uh, somebody might ask why you never got married. We'll stick with that one. And you say, and I was really busy building a career. I help my aging parents. And I've had some long-term relationships because that's what people want to hear. Like, are you a liability? And then you say, and I'm looking forward to finding my last first date, you know, something like that. But you don't fill in all the details of, I failed at relationships because I have an anxious attachment style and
Right. Right.
I tend to be really clingy and,
Mm-hmm.
don't date me, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, we then, as we get to know someone, so if a person's divorced or widowed, we don't go into the whole story, right? We share it bit by bit. So level two would be, and the reason I found out that relationships weren't lasting is because I was choosing the wrong people. Level three would be you go into detail if you want to, but people don't even need to hear all the details. They don't need to
Mm-hmm.
know. They just want to know, are you somebody I want to date? Are you somebody who's going to hurt me? Is there potential here for something to develop?
Yeah, I love how you're talking about walking toward the problem. If someone asks something as awkward as, why are you single? I get it. People are nervous and they don't know what to say and they just ask that one, even though it's an awkward question.
Yeah.
But how practical that there's still a way to answer it without going to either extreme. I've heard you mention like I'm going to be real defensive. That's no good. I'm going to share everything, but that seems like a nice sort of middle ground. And it also sounds really authentic the way you described it. And it
Mm.
sounds like teaching folks to be authentic is a big part of what you do.
Yeah, be authentic, be curious. Curiosity is a huge part of my teaching. People tend to be afraid to ask deeper questions. So somebody says something and you're left with a lot of questions, but you think it's rude to ask the next question. Or you're really curious to know them better, but you think it's pushy to ask at this stage in the beginning. And I've had so many clients come to me and say, why did he do this? Why did she do that? I don't know, ask them, like do it in a gentle way. But, if a person brings up something and it makes you pause, just get curious. You just shared something with me. I'm curious what you meant by that. That's it. Like, that's all you got to do, and you'll have answers. But we are afraid to say things. We're also afraid to tell somebody we like them. Women often are afraid to ask a man out. They're afraid to send the first messages. They think it's the wrong thing to do and men will be turned off. There's a lot of confusion out there about what are best dating practices. And so I have something called an operating manual that I send to my clients when they first start working with me. And basically, we all have an operating manual. We just don't know how to read it or identify it. And so when we can identify how we operate best, what we need, and often we don't meet our own needs because we don't even know what they are. So it could be from the practical. I need 8 hours of sleep. I go to bed early. I go to bed late. I'm a morning person. I'm a night person. I'm an introvert. I'm an extrovert. If you're an introvert, you're going to need time alone to recharge. If you don't claim it in a relationship, you're going to be resentful. You're going to piss off the other person. So the more we know about ourselves in three main categories, and I say like the practical day-to-day stuff, the kind of food we eat. I had clients who never asked to eat at a restaurant that was gluten-free or dairy-free or have options besides lettuce on the menu that they could eat. And even with friend groups, they were afraid to assert themselves. And so the more we can identify those things, the better it is. Then we have the worldview, the way we see the world, and that includes religion and spirituality and fate and miracles and all those more spiritual things, because you want to align with another person in those areas. And then we have the sexual area, and it's really about the frequency of sex, the kind of sex we like to have, how open we are about sex, and it's important that we know ourselves. And I think as we get older, hopefully we're able to express that to people.
I hear knowing yourself, taking that inventory about yourself, even prior to dating or prior to getting to know someone, so that you know who you're sharing and what it is that works well for you. As you were talking about that, I can only imagine someone that's allergic to gluten and not saying anything, and the pain they must stuff and endure. Or if someone just doesn't like someone talking really loud, something simple like that. I can't imagine just having to tolerate that for years and years. But yet I hear you saying sometimes folks will do that early on because they don't want to come across a certain way.
Yeah, when you go on vacation the first time, I always have a conversation with my clients about having that talk about, here's what I'm going to need.
Mhm.
I'm going to need to read every day in my room quietly to recharge my batteries. It's not personal, it has nothing to do with you. But the more we can practice that self-care, I had clients who were meditators, and when they were dating somebody and they slept over, they would not meditate because it was awkward. Like, how am I going to claim this time for myself? But they were out of sorts the rest of the day. So you can't do that to yourself. It's really unhealthy. And you want somebody who's going to respect the fact that you meditate, that you take care of yourself, that you know yourself really well. And you want to have that with them too. I mean, to me, that's the ideal.
And it sounds like as someone knows themselves and is very aware and taking the time to sort of take an inventory and listen, I wonder if that doesn't help screen or help them get an idea as far as what a potential partner or someone they're dating is with versus how well they relate to that or don't relate.
Sure. I mean, in the podcast I was listening to that I talked about before, she mentioned a blind date she went on where the guy didn't ask her any questions, and 10 minutes had gone by and he still hadn't asked her anything. And so right after dinner, she went to the bathroom, collected herself, came back out and said, "Hey, listen, I gotta go. Thank you so much for dinner." And when she got home, he said, "I think you're beautiful. I'd like to see you again." And she said he still didn't ask her a question. He didn't say, "Did you get home okay?
Uh-huh.
Would you like to see me
Uh-huh.
again? Are you free on Wednesday?" And so she decided to be honest with him. And she said, "I really did not feel a connection with you because you didn't ask me a single question. And, I wish you the best of luck, but, most people don't want to be schooled. They don't want I used to tell everyone I dated, this is what you can do better. It's that I don't do that anymore. And I don't recommend people do that. But imagine getting feedback, being able to take it in, which is what coaches do, and then course correcting so that you are not going to keep repeating the same cycle of behavior. It changes everything. And so what a coach does is, you reflect and you mirror and you hear the other person and you give them feedback and you give them tools so that they can modify behaviors. They can be better at expressing themselves authentically. They can be more compassionate and deal with their own internal baggage stuff that they're bringing to every single relationship, projecting and not getting curious, making assumptions. These are game changers. And often it's not that long after you do all this internal work that you find somebody that you will date for a relationship because you've gotten all the roadblocks out of the way.
As you're talking about how you coach and teach people, I love the idea of questions because I think of questions as a form of investing. Again, not the detective kind of questions where we're peppering them one after the next, but the curiosity ones. And as we were thinking about this back when I was a therapist, the joke with us all was we all knew better, but the whole thing of all our clients fall in love with us, well, they really don't. But the reason they have those ethical rules is because listening is that powerful. I mean, it makes someone drop their guard, they feel empathized, they connect with you. And so much so that we had rules. I mean, coaches should also about not dating clients, not getting involved with them because it wasn't fair. But I remember how powerful that was. Not that memory comes up when I hear you describe this about what you're teaching folks to do. That it just leads to a natural connection.
Yeah, we all want to be heard. It's a good example of a therapist and mental transference where somebody falls in love with their therapist because it's the first time probably for most people that they're feeling truly seen and heard. And what we can do as coaches is to help people find that out in the dating world by being not just a good listener, but a good, curious questioner. And another thing they talked about in the podcast was people who asked follow-up questions, like in a speed dating situation, got more dates because you're curious about that person. It is the most flattering thing you can do is to ask questions, like you're asking me today.
Yes, you've taught me well. So when you're with someone, working with them, how does that work for them to actually experience? Because I'm assuming the way they interact with you once they get to know you is going to be fairly similar to the way they interact with other people. I wonder what it's like for them. I don't know if practice with you is the right word, but the feedback and the observations you make, what do they usually tell you that it's like actually working with you and how that translates out into like with dating?
Well, first of all, they become more discerning. So when they are really clear about the kind of person that would be a good fit, they're not going to spend a lot of time trying to make something work that doesn't have any potential. They also stop dating potential because that person will be great when they change everything about themselves. So, yeah, when they work with me, they'll often tell me that they're struggling with a type of communication, for example, or setting boundaries. They don't know how to say, I like you, but you're moving too fast. Or here's my standard around exclusivity and sex and protection and all of these things that people are afraid to bring up. So we might have a role play exercise, or I'll have them script something out and then share it with me via email so that I will be able to see what they want to say when it's a tough conversation. I'm in the middle of actually finishing up a communications course that I love teaching because we really break down the kind of communicator you are, the kind of communicator you're communicating with, and how to deal with objections and conflict and all the things that are difficult for people to do in relationships. And so when they're working with me, they get homework, they have to practice these things. And not just with people they date, but with everyone, because I think it's even more important to practice with people who are less scary, who are safer in your life, so that when it comes to higher stakes, when you're dating and you really like somebody and you start to kind of lose yourself, that you will be able to have the courage to have those conversations.
And it sounds like with the practice with you and then with other people, going back to the authentic part, it sounds like that part gets drawn out of them as they get to know you or work with you, and they get to experiment or practice with other folks that they're talking to.
Yeah, and they feel better about themselves because so many of us hide who we are. We adapt to our surroundings in childhood to survive, and we're still using the same adaptive skills to survive in the dating world.
Mhm.
It's not helpful, right? The people pleaser, the controller, the different parts of us that have shown up to survive childhood when childhood hasn't been ideal, which is most of us. And then we wonder why, if we've been a people pleaser for the first 5 dates and we haven't spoken the truth, and now it's really hard to say what's true for us because somebody's used to us being a certain way. So, yeah, it's just this authenticity piece that you keep bringing up is so important. It
Mhm.
is it's a hard thing for us. We're not trained to be authentic, we're trained to
Mhm.
adapt.
You know, like what you said, as far as growing up, depending on what I went through, that if it wasn't modeled for me, if I didn't see it, if it wasn't encouraged, I'm assuming authentic is going to feel really uncomfortable or really awkward, or maybe even being told that that was bad, or, you know, why are you thinking this way? And I hear that to have your last first date, that I'm ready to go from dating to getting married to that sounds like it might feel uncomfortable at times.
Yeah. I mean, just, conversations that are about us asserting things that are not so PC, as we say,
Mhm.
um, they may not be accepted. But like, there's an example of a woman in my Facebook group. I have a large Facebook group called Your Last First Date, and it's for women over 40. We have 7 monitors. It's an incredibly supportive place. And so people will share their situations. And this woman who I've gotten to know over the years, I've coached her a few times. She was talking about somebody she's dated on and off for 2 years. And he's an alcoholic, but he doesn't drink around her. He's There's a lot of good things in the relationship, but he's not consistent. And so that's why they've been on and off for 2 years. When he drinks, he's really unkind. He's misogynistic. He's a lot of things that are not okay. And yet she doesn't leave him. And this is her pattern. She stays for the good stuff and she doesn't pay close enough attention to the deal breakers. Somebody who's not getting support for alcoholism, who says, I'm doing it for you, but I won't do it for me in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
I dated a guy who would never use his blinkers when he made turns. And I was shocked. Like, how do you drive without signaling to somebody that you're turning? And I said, I don't feel safe driving with you in the car if you're not going to use your blinkers. So he said, okay, I'll use them when I'm in the car with you. And I said, no, you don't get it. Like, you're unsafe to other people. This is a bigger character issue than I'm just going to be nice to you while we're together. So I forgot what the question was, but this is an example of something that people need to really look at the deal breakers and not excuse them.
No, but that goes back to authenticity. Where I know we're saying that in layers, but I know when I'm working with someone, I don't repeat the same word over and over again. But I learn best when I get it a little here and just the repetition of it, so my brain gets a chance to look at it different angles. And, you know, as you're saying that about the wipers, I know what comes to mind is I think for men there are some things men will do. Okay, I'll do this because she likes it. So okay, that's fine. That may not be the way you think. I like how you distinguish that between yes, I like it, but I'm more interested that I feel safe with you, not just with me around, but that you're a safe person. And so it's not just my personal preference as much as it's a conviction. And I like how well you understood that about yourself so that you're able to address that when that came up.
Thank you. And I think once people understand the severity of the issue, they stop just pushing it down and saying it's not that
Mm-hmm.
important. Maybe I'm too picky. So it took me a long time to get there. I mean, I had to do a lot of work on myself to really understand myself, my core values, what was important to me. But once you do, and go back to the operating manual, you can just say, this is important to me. What's important to you? And will you respect it? And if a person says, yes, I'll respect it, and then shows you otherwise, you have your answer early on. You
Mm-hmm.
don't wait 2 years down the road to say, well, oh, it just came up again. Ah, they did it again. Yeah, okay. They've
Mm-hmm.
shown you 8,000 times that they're not the right person for you, and you're the one who's staying. So then you've got to look at yourself. Why do you tolerate this? And it usually goes back to childhood and the patterns that you remember from childhood that you saw modeled for you and the way that love was shown to you. And you have to rewire your brain. And that's a big part of what coaching does, is that rewiring for healthy attraction instead of unhealthy.
Yeah, so that healthy attraction, that rewiring, I can hear how unfamiliar that might seem to someone. and how maybe it feels selfish, maybe it feels uncomfortable, probably, maybe it feels whatever, a bunch of other things. And how do you help someone when they're going through that, when it feels so uncomfortable? Is it about going through, so it's the manual or the handbook? I've got a picture of a book in front of my hand.
It's a manual.
Manual. Okay. As far as the use of the manual, do they just use it as a resource? Then as they continue to use it, it becomes more ingrained in them?
Yeah, that and all the other teachings. So it's also about baby steps, right? So you're gonna probably attract the same kind of person again and again, but maybe they're a little bit better. And maybe you get to a point where you're still attracted to them, but you don't date them. That's so I don't think we can rewire our brains that we will never be attracted to people who have narcissistic tendencies. If that's been your pattern, you're still going to find them in the room. They're going to be the most charming person there, and that's going to be attractive. But yeah, I'll give you an example from my life. I dated a guy many years ago who was very narcissistic, but I was bored. I had met a lot of men who bored me. So here's this really intelligent, brilliant, funny guy. He's
Fabulous.
right, generous, good looking, but he wasn't dating me exclusively. So I had my boundaries, but I still continued to date him with boundaries. And I told him I wouldn't date him anymore when it wasn't fun anymore. And it got to a point where he said some really nasty things, and I said I'm done. And that was a huge deal for me. So that was one of the ways that I broke that pattern for myself. But then about 15 years later, I saw him performing on a stage. I was shocked. I was at an event in New York City, and he gets up on stage and I'm like, "Oh my God, how was I ever attracted to this person?
Mm.
He is such a narcissist. He's not even making any sense." And I went up to him afterwards. He didn't even recognize me. He was just so full of himself. He started telling me about his most recent girlfriend. I mean, it was just, I was
Mm.
like, oh, but that took time to rewire, to be able to say no, and then to see that person again and go, wow, I am so far from the person I used to be. But that's an indication of how this stuff works. Like we can make those
Mm.
changes.
And with the changes I hear you talking about is it's twofold of one being aware of what I really want and what's a good fit for me, which helps us see as far as what's not a good fit, like the narcissistic guy that maybe he's chocolate ice cream, but past dessert, I don't want any more chocolate ice cream 3 meals a day because of how it makes me feel.
Yeah.
And I hear that balance you're talking about that someone gets, that they're not forcing something as much as they're becoming, sounds like more in line with who they really are and what they really want.
Yeah, it's almost like a lot of my clients will say they have like me sitting on their shoulder going, "What would Sandy do?" And
Mm.
eventually it's what would they do? Because I don't want them to be looking at me for advice. It's really about them. We are all wired differently, and what works for one person is not going to work for another person. But there are basic principles that do work for everybody. And some of them are to know yourself really well, know your core values, know what works for you, learn how to communicate that early on, learn how to communicate effectively, learn how to set and keep boundaries because a lot of times we set them and then we don't enforce them. We just set them and go, why? Well, they didn't keep that boundary. And to just walk away from things that don't serve you. And I think that's true for every part of our lives. It's not just about dating. It's about relationships with friends. It's about work that we hate, that we're just going through the motions. Just so many things that when we're aligned with who we are at our core and start to really follow our own manual, everything in life gets better and it becomes intuitive. We start to recognize the people who are better for us. We start to see that level of curiosity in somebody and we're attracted to it much more than the 6'2" blue-eyed person in finance that every woman thinks they need. The blonde, buxom blonde that a man might be attracted to. That's just surface, and it doesn't hold up over time when the other stuff is missing.
Listening to you describe both of those, it sounds like what the person really wants is it's got a very calming effect to it as opposed to just that full of energy. And not that there's not a place for that, but I hear that it's much more content with that. I'm thinking about people from my past. I've heard the way clients talk about when there's someone they meet and there's something different in their voice that's not the high pitched excitement I've heard before, but it is a curiosity. It's more of a fun. It's more of a surprise that they're surprised that I could find this appealing without just being crazy, thinking about him all the time, running, 90 miles an hour all the time. So that reminds me of that just hear you listening to it. And what do you find for folks when if someone's just starting out now and gosh, maybe the pattern's been, I try really hard, but it just doesn't seem to work. Is there a starting place you have with them or questions that you have them ask just to kind of reflect a little bit as far as how to change where they're going?
Yeah, so when somebody works with me, they fill out a 21 question questionnaire. I had a client say it was a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a lot of work, but it gives me like a full session without having met with them yet. I know their patterns. I know what they think their must-haves and deal breakers are. I know, who they've dated in the past and what their takeaway is, because we don't always see what they had in common. That's something that I will discuss with them. So I learn a lot about them. They learn a lot about themselves. And I also have them fill out a wheel of life, which is the components, the eight key components of our life and how we're living into each of those components. So I want to look at their whole life, not just what dating is like. I want to know, are they happy with their career? What's their relationship with money, with fun and recreation? Do they have good friends? Do they have a good relationship with their family? These are all important. So if your wheel of life is really bumpy, you have some zeros and some tens, you're going to be walking around in life with a lot of bumps with really bad shock absorbers. And so we want to look at that and improve some of those areas. And the other thing I look at is a saboteur assessment, which is how do they rate in terms of 10 different saboteurs? And so the saboteurs being the controller, the people pleaser, the hyper vigilant, the hyperachiever. These are the ways that we show up in life based on what we talked about before, based on childhood and survival skills. And that's also how we often date. And so I want to be able to show them, okay, these are some of the ways that we can start to make some changes, and so that's the starting point. It's a lot of stuff. That's the intake session. And then we start to go from there and just develop whatever area needs the most attention starts to get the more attention at the beginning.
I like listening to it. I hear that you're talking about evaluating the whole person. And I love the idea of if there are some areas that are really lacking or they're struggling with. I'm thinking of a tire when you said that, the one that's got a big clump of mud in one spot. And just as you go around that thump you get. And I hadn't thought about it that way until you said that. But it is like that. When you have one area that's really struggling, it's a constant reminder. Just every step you take, or if you have a sore back, I know when you move a certain way, it's just a reminder of, oh, that's just there all the time. And I can see how valuable that would be finding that out up front so that you look at if we're going to make this change and we're going to date differently with the purpose in mind, we want to do it holistically. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Yeah, we want to do it holistically, and the more we can bring that self-knowledge to the table, hopefully we'll attract somebody who also has done some work and is willing to take responsibility for their share, for what they've created in the past and what they want to create in the present and future. And those are the relationships that are the most successful. And it's, a lot of women will say, but I've done all this work and I meet so many men who haven't gone to therapy and haven't done the work. And so while that can be a reality out there, I think women tend to do a lot more self-reflection in general. I don't like to generalize, but I do think that that's
Well, I
been
think men
my
would agree
experience.
with you.
What was that?
I think men would agree with you.
Okay. Well, men weren't socialized to do the kind of work that women do. I mean, I think it's almost expected of women, and men have been socialized not to feel. So, we still have a far way to go, but I truly believe that it's not the fact that they've done all the work and that you have equal amount of work. It's the willingness to be wrong. It's the willingness to say, hey, I see I have some work to do. I admit that this is an area of weakness for me, or this is a trigger for me, and I'm going to take care of it. Somebody who has ADD who has never taken care of it is going to be a liability in a relationship. So are you going to take medication? Are you going to learn how to be less impulsive? These are all important things because they affect other people, not just you.
When you were talking about men and emotions, I've got triplet boys, and when they were younger, they were more emotional than my daughter was. And I'd heard other folks say, yeah, little boys are more emotional. I didn't believe it until I saw it. It wasn't just one of them. And that really made me rethink a lot of the things about emotions. And I mean, I do think there's a biological component as far as why we're different with emotions, but that men really do feel deeply in a lot of things. We don't express as much. It doesn't come out that way. And I would think just knowing that, someone knowing that, especially that's done work, if they understand that it can be drawn out, especially with the questions you're talking about, the curiosity. I find men are hesitant to share stuff because I don't know if this is going to be boring. Am I going to get made fun of? Or I'm going whatever. It's going to come across stupid, and so it's just easier not to say anything. But those questions sounds like a wonderful way to draw someone out and to really find out who he is.
Yeah, and it's a good point. I'm glad you brought up how emotional men are. I think men are very emotional. As I said, I think it's the socialization and the way men are told not to cry and be a man and man up. The kinds of expressions are terrible. But I had the same experience raising two daughters and a boy. My son is the most emotionally expressive. My daughters are emotional. They're more out of whack emotionally. They don't express themselves in the same manner. But he and I can talk about anything, and it's a very safe and wonderful relationship. He's willing to look within much more than my daughters.
So, listen to before we wrap up, I hear as far as how you work with folks, and I love the holistic approach. And what would you say to someone they perhaps they've been in therapy before or they've read a lot of books and it's just, I want a relationship, but it just seems like it just isn't working out. Is there something that your clients or people say that the ones that actually cross the line, that actually start taking those steps, that the realization they get to, or something that they think that helps them take that step?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main difference for them when they start working with me is that I give them tools. It's not just,
Hmm.
my therapist told me I should go speak up more. Well, how did they tell you to speak up? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
they just be more authentic. What does that mean? I don't understand.
Uh-huh.
That's what we've been told all our lives. Just get out there, just do it. But they don't know how. So it feels like you're on a tight wire without a net. Like, how am I going to do that scary thing? Speak up? Like, nobody ever told me why it's so hard for me and how to do it. And so there's the deeper work of really understanding yourself, but there's also the practical how to. And the how to me, is the most important part because without that, we're just still lost and not sure how to go about doing things differently. And so the more we practice the actions of doing something differently, the more it imprints in our brain and we start to rewire our brains. Our brains are very plastic and we can rewire attraction, we can rewire how we show up in the world. I mean, I was a behind the scenes person, never in front of a camera, would never dream of having a podcast or being on video. I was married to a comedian and he was on stage. I wrote for him. I directed. I
Oh, I didn't know that.
never saw myself as
Hmm.
any of these things. And at the age of 50, I'm divorced, I'm starting a new career, and if I don't get in front of a camera, I do not get known. If I don't have a podcast, nobody will know me. And so I did the hard thing. I did the scary thing, but I also got support. I hired a coach, many coaches. I hired a speech
Mm,
coach. I hired a business coach. I went to Toastmasters to learn how to speak in public. You don't just get out there and do it. You have a desire to do something, you've got to get support. We get personal trainers. We go to the gym. If you keep going to the gym for 10 years and see no results, hire a
mm,
personal trainer. I mean,
mm,
they see things that we don't see. They can target the areas that we can't. And so that's what coaches do. And that's why I believe in coaching so much. And I've had my own fabulous experiences with coaches, and it's quick. It's a pretty quick thing. It's not you go for 10 years. I mean, my programs are 3 or 6 months usually. It's
mm,
within a few weeks you've
mm,
already made changes.
mm. So, yeah, so someone going through that would realistically expect to start noticing something different in a matter of weeks, maybe not have everything resolved, depending on what's going on, but they should notice something fairly soon, as opposed to let's just give it a try for years and see what happens,
Yeah.
which would terrify me if someone told me that. I just can't imagine just waiting and hoping, waiting and hoping. So I love how practical, and it sounds like from your own experience, that's what you've had, be on the other end while someone coached you. So you know what that's like to actually see a result and have something be explained. One thing I think I relate a lot to is I've got a learning disability, and I was told growing up all the time, just study harder. Just try a little bit harder. I was called Bobby then. Bobby, just try harder. And it would infuriate me, but I was in high school, so there was no one to really tell. I guess I could. And when you're saying that, I can just imagine folks working with you finally having the relief of, oh, I don't have to just be more authentic, so nebulous, or be more, or have better boundaries. I love that one. Just have better boundaries. But actually telling them and showing them what that means and what that looks like. See, that sounds like it would take a lot of pressure off them.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine with your learning disability, there's so many people who have this. And my son was just talking to his friend who has ADD and said he's struggling in college. And he said, "Don't you have ADD?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Are you medicated?" And he goes, "No." And he goes, "Well, you might want to think about getting some
Mm-hmm.
support for your ADD because you're not focusing in school." It's so clear, but he probably forgot. I struggle in school. And so this isn't because I'm stupid. It's because my ADD makes it hard for me to focus. So learning new ways to do things really helps us to feel better about ourselves. I mean, my ex-husband had dyslexia, never had it diagnosed properly, and became a professional comedian because that was the way that he got attention. You know, how many comedians out there came from some kind of messed up anything? I mean, that's generally why they turn to comedy. So, I mean, the good thing is we have comedians, but the bad thing is that they suffer so much, right? So,
Yes.
yeah, we don't need to suffer so much.
No, and I think when someone I'm thinking of clients just listening to you is that struggle and suffering doesn't have to be that way. I've gone to coaches too. It's been very helpful, from business to other aspects, and just to have someone explain something. Sometimes for me, just to hear it out loud and go, oh yeah. I mean, it may be something I already knew, but to have someone validate it, and I especially think in terms of dating, of I've got this gut feeling maybe, but I don't know to trust that versus this weird feeling. Maybe I'm just being overly sensitive. I don't know. But to have someone like you say, no, no, this is why. This is trust this one. Here's why. And let's take this action. So I can see why someone would start to notice difference in a matter of weeks. So you're going to give us a cap on that? No, no. Okay.
No, I agree with you. I think, and it's reassuring to people to know that there are some skills, there are some things we don't know, that we can't see ourselves the way other people can see us. And almost nobody gives us honest feedback, really. The best friends will give you honest feedback sometimes, but it's hard to hear and it's hard to say, here's how I experience you. But when you hire somebody and you're invested with time, money, emotion, you're willing to do the work, it's amazing the results that can happen.
We're going to have links down here below if you're watching this on YouTube or even on the website with the podcast. But if someone's listening in the car, tell us where that someone can reach out to you or how can they find out more about you.
So I'm at lastfirstdate.com, and all of my podcast, everything is there. I just also wanted to mention I have 3 books. They're all available as ebooks, regular paperback, and audio books. This one, Becoming a Woman of Value, is about how to thrive in all parts of your life. That was the first book I wrote because it was a lot of my journey was figuring out what helped me back. The second book was like a handbook in dating. It's called Choice Points in Dating, and this was really about how to date, all aspects of dating, from how to think about dating, how to choose a partner, how to know if it's your last first date, the right kinds of questions, online dating, offline dating, all the parts. And this last book was published in 2024. It's called Love at Last. And this was true stories of couples who found love later in life. And each one has love lessons that they learned at the end of each chapter. And the first couple in the book was a couple whose wedding I officiated last year. It was my first officiating experience. It was amazing to take her from not believing she'd ever be attracted to anybody to falling madly in love and getting remarried to an incredible man. And it's when you have these relationships and you've done the work, it's better than anything you've ever experienced. And that's, I think a lot of people don't know what's possible. And so I just want to give people hope that when you get the right support, you will change your life for the better in so many ways. And I highly recommend that people work with coaches. Whether it's me or Bob or anybody else, get yourself support because life is short and don't you want to live it to its fullest?
Oh, that's well said. All right. Well, Sandy, thank you so much for joining us. And for those watching, be sure and visit her. You've heard about her. You heard the way she works. She's been doing this for years. Has lots of people that will vouch for her. At least all the research I did, and liked looking at her content. So thanks again, Sandy, for joining us. I enjoyed having you.
Thank you, Bob. I enjoyed it too.